European Court of Human Rights this morning passed the judgment on the case of Gurgen Margarian. Now, will you please tell us what happened today and what is the judgment all about?
Yes, today the European Courts released its judgment. It was a case against two countries, against Hungary and Azerbaijan, who back in 2012 agreed to transfer Mr. Safarov from his prison in Hungary back to Azerbaijan. And they did so under a treaty that allows for the transfer of prisoners so that they can serve their sentences back at their home state. And that's partly about rehabilitating people. They can see their family and so on. But in this case, immediately when he was returned to Baku, he was pardoned by the president. He was greeted as a great hero. He was paid his salary arrears. He was promoted even. So a whole series of steps, which meant that he didn't have to serve his sentence. So what the European Court today has issued a very strong judgment that condemns that directly, that the failure of the Azerbaijani authorities to ensure that he served his full sentence. He'd been convicted of murder back in 2004 in Budapest, and he'd been sentenced to life. And 8 years later, he was transferred to Baku and released. That, the European Court said, breached the right to life of the family of the man who was murdered, and also the other Armenian officer who Mr. Safarov tried to murder, was found guilty of attempted murder. It breached their right to life because when there is a fatality, states must investigate what happened, and if there is sufficient evidence, they must go on then and prosecute the perpetrator, and the court would convict and then sentence the perpetrator, and the system must ensure that the sentence is fulfilled. And it was that aspect that was found to be breached by the judgment today, that in releasing Mr. Safarov, not requiring him to serve his full sentence, they breached the applicant's right to life.
Yeah, very interesting. The case events were described here in court's documents. It says that in January 2004, the first applicant and Gurgen Margarian arrived in Budapest with a view to participating in 3 months English language course organized within the framework of the NATO-sponsored Partnership for Peace program. The course included 2 participants from each of the former Soviet Socialist Republic, including 2 officers from Azerbaijani army. The participants were all accommodated on the campus of Hungary's National Defense University at around 5 a.m. On 19 February 2004, one of the members of Azeri army, Ramil Safarov, murdered Gurgen Margarian while he was asleep by decapitating him with at least 12 blows of an axe, and then tried to break down the door of the first applicant's room, allegedly yelling, "Open the door, you are Armenian, we will cut the throat of all of you." He was ultimately stopped by the police, who had meanwhile arrived at the scene. And then it describes that, the criminal proceedings, and also there is a passage here saying that Ramil Safarov actually admitted all these charges brought against him when he was interviewed in Russian. He said, yeah, he did that because he thought that these Armenians should be killed. And what can you say as a not only defense lawyer but a human rights advocacy, the leader of human rights advocacy group? What happened here?
Well, there was the Hungarian authorities acted appropriately, certainly in the early years, in investigating this terrible, tragic case, prosecuting Mr. Safarov and convicting and sentencing him appropriately. That was all good and right. But then some years later, the Minister of Justice in Hungary agreed with the Azerbaijan authorities to release him. And the failure of the Azerbaijani authorities to ensure that sorry, that was. Can I go back? That was wrong. The Minister of Justice of Hungary and the Azerbaijani minister agreed to transfer him back to Azerbaijan, and instead of making sure that he served his full sentence, he was released. And that's the problem in this case. It's a fundamental breach of human rights, of the right to life. The very purpose of this convention that they were applying, the convention for the transfer of sentenced prisoners, is all about transferring people from back to their home states so that they can should serve their sentence back at home. It's not so that people can be released many years before they've served their full sentence.
But what happened was actually he was released as a hero, and even human rights defender in that country said that he should be an example for all Azeris here. That's really, to my ears, is just unbelievable. What's your take on this?
Well, the court's issued a very strong judgment in relation to Azerbaijan this morning, not only finding a violation of the right to life, but also separately finding that the Azerbaijani authorities acted discriminatorily. The court found they were what they did was racially motivated because the original murder did have a racial basis to it, and there was no justification given at any point given by the Azerbaijani authorities for releasing him after only 8 years. So it's a strong judgment today. The court didn't go any further to specify exactly what the Azerbaijani authorities should do now, but the case may be referred up to the Grand Chamber of the European Court. But in any event, the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe will now need to decide what steps the Azerbaijani authorities should take, and there will be a strong and careful scrutiny of what they do, and certainly they should be looking at taking steps to ensure that Mr. Safarov fulfills his full sentence.
So you mean it's possible still that the Council of Europe, the Committee of Ministers of Council of Europe, force the Azeri authorities to get back him to the jail? Is it a possibility or not?
Well, the judgment makes it very, very clear that in releasing him without making him serve his full sentence, the Azerbaijani authorities have breached the European Convention on Human Rights. That raises the question of what's the appropriate redress, what's the appropriate restitution now? Well, certainly the families in this case would say that Mr. Safarov serving the sentence that he was given by the Hungarian court would be proper restitution. So, but it goes to the Committee of Ministers. So the other Council of Europe states, the 45 beyond Hungary and Azerbaijan who are involved in this case will now have to decide those questions.
Very interesting. And actually, but do you believe that this is doable? Is it possibility? What's your prediction on this one?
Well, we'll have to see. No doubt there will be, of course, strong opposition in Azerbaijan, but the Council of Europe has taken
also some lobbying efforts, right, to stop it from happening.
Well, the Council of Europe has taken strong measures against Azerbaijan in recent years. It brought infringement proceedings in relation to Ilgar Mammadov, the politician who was detained in Baku, and the Committee of Ministers there called for his release. It took some time, but he was eventually released. So the Council of Europe, does have a record in more recent times of exerting pressure on a number of countries where it's required. So certainly we would hope that there will be that kind of pressure, that restitution in this case, means that the families should have full justice.
Mm-hmm. So actually, this case is against Azerbaijan, right? And who filed the case? Who is the defendant here?
It was against Azerbaijan and Hungary as well.
Yeah.
The court found that Hungary wasn't at fault in the end, just Azerbaijan. But it was brought by the family of the man who was murdered and the other Armenian officer who was attacked.
Yes, yes. And now actually Hungary was cleared of all possible charges, right? But there were some claims, accusations that at the time that transfer happened, Hungary also accepted some substantial financial aid from Azerbaijan. Is that could that be shown in this case in any way or not? Was that brought up?
The court, of course, asked both countries to explain what happened and to provide evidence of that. Both countries provided the exchange of letters between the ministers that preceded the transfer. Neither country said that there'd been any inducement, any kind of payment. So there was no evidence before the court of that. I'm aware of stories in the media to that effect, but there was no evidence that the court had or that the governments produced about any kind of payment.
Okay, now what is the next step? Like you said, the next step, Grand Chamber might take up this case and issue another judgment. What is this ruling? What happens when it goes to Grand Chamber?
Yeah, in fact, the court, during the course of this case was decided by just a chamber of the court, so 7 judges. Mm-hmm. And the chamber had wanted to refer the case up to the Grand Chamber during the course of the case. Azerbaijan objected, so therefore it didn't go up. But now any of the parties could try to get the case referred up to the Grand Chamber, and it's the court that decides. So it would be possible for the families to request referral if they're not happy with some aspects of the case. Similarly for the 2 governments, they could request referral. There's a process we've got to consider that within the next 3 months, and if it's accepted, there will be a fresh judgment by the Grand Chamber, which is the 17 judges, a completely fresh judgment. They will look again at all the issues. If there is no request for referral to the Grand Chamber, then the case will go in the ordinary way to the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe.
Uh-huh. And what's your prediction? What will happen eventually? And we'll see that Azerbaijan, it's almost certain that they will refuse to take any action based on this judgment. For them, what I anticipate now, we'll see a lot of criticism of the European Court, and they will start blaming Armenians, Armenian lobby, this and that, and you will see that this will be rather another occasion for further glorifying the criminal act of Ramil Safarov.
Well, we'll have to see what this. It will partly depend on what steps I think the international community take. At the time when news broke about the case itself, there was strong statements from a number of international bodies, a number of states, European Parliament, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, all produced strong resolutions condemning this. So now it will certainly, in part, be a question of what the international community thinks should happen, what kind of pressure they can exert. But certainly, from the family's perspective, restitution would require Mr. Safarov to serve his sentence as the Hungarian court originally ordered.
Mm-hmm. Also, Mr. Leach, what, as a defense lawyer, as well as the head of the leader of Human Rights Advocacy group, what this case teaches these 2 nations, what this case will this case help somehow to alleviate, this animosity between these 2 nations? I'm not talking about the conflict, but the hatred that exists for example, in Azerbaijan against any Armenian, against any ethnicity, any ethnic culture, ethnic Armenian. This is so strong, and almost every day you can see on Azeri television anti-Armenian propaganda.
Well, sadly, I don't think a judgment like this can solve those fundamental questions. We see, from my perspective, I see unacceptable rhetoric coming from both countries about the conflict. But what this judgment, I think, does do is underline the importance of the rule of law. The convention about transferring sentenced prisoners is about ensuring that prisoners are rehabilitated, that they serve their sentences back at home, and not that they're released. And this was an agreement that ministers reached back in 2012. It's taken us several years for the court to get here, but finally we have a decision in which the European Court very strongly condemns what was done, strongly condemns the Azerbaijani decisions to release him. So it's I think a strong victory for the rule of law, a strong reminder that states will be called to account when they breach fundamental human rights.
Uh-huh. And also, would you tell us if I read here I saw something that the family did not ask for any financial compensation. Is that the case, and why is that?
That's right. The family and the other officer did not. They're of course entitled to seek compensation in a European Court case, and the European Court will frequently award compensation to applicants who are successful. They chose not to. I think they wanted to underline that.
So they could, if they have asked, they could get some compensation,
yes,
right?
Yes, as with any case, if they had asked for damages, they would have had to have been awarded damages. They chose not to make any claim. I think that underlines their broader quest for justice and for restitution. They felt not through the payment of damages, but through other measures, which may be, for example, that Mr. Safarov serves his sentence, or indeed that there are wider changes to the laws to ensure that in both Hungary and Azerbaijan that this kind of agreement doesn't happen again, that there's proper regulation to stop it from happening.
Okay, Mr. Leach, the final word. What's your? This is like a victory for you and for your team, defense team. What are you gonna say at the end? What's your message for Armenians and for everyone?
I mean, the most important thing is that it secured in a very tragic, awful case. It secured an important measure of justice for the family of the man who was murdered and for the other officer who was attacked. And it's a reminder to any state that there is this system in Europe that will call states to account when they breach human rights. And so that's an important lesson from today's judgment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leach. Thank you. It was indeed a very interesting interview. Thank you.